Test, test. All good?
The committee will come to order. Without objection, the chair may declare a recess at any time. Today's business meeting is being broadcast live and streamed on the committee's YouTube channel. It will be conducted entirely on an unclassified basis. All participants are reminded to refrain from discussing classified or other information protected from public disclosure. The committee will now turn to the legislative business at hand, the markup of H.R. 6611, the FISA Reform and Reauthorization Act of 2023. I ask unanimous consent that any recorded vote be postponed until the completion of consideration of the legislative text and any amendments without objection so ordered. Today, the committee meets to consider H.R. 6611 to amend the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act of 1978, to make certain reforms to the authorities under such act, and to authorize Title VII of such act and for its reauthorization and for other purposes. The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, or FISA, established safeguards on intelligence operations regarding the collection of foreign intelligence. Included in FISA is a critical national security tool known as Section 702, which is a highly targeted collection program that only collects on foreign targets who possess or communicate valuable foreign intelligence information. In short, threats to national security. On December 31, Section 702 will sunset. As a matter of emphasis, I want to reiterate that Section 702 authorizes intelligence collection only on foreign persons who possess or communicate specific types of foreign intelligence information. The authority does not, and with today's bill being marked up, will not allow the intelligence community to target any Americans without a warrant. FISA Section 702 has been reauthorized over the years with very little fanfare. However, this reauthorization is in the spotlight because of the well-documented abuses by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The FBI has abused 702 of FISA. These abuses demonstrate the need for congressional action in the form of comprehensive, meaningful reform, not just to Section 702, but all of FISA, coupled with reauthorization of this vital national security tool. This committee, with the establishment of an internal bipartisan working group, and in parallel, the establishment of a joint Republican working group with the House Judiciary Committee, has committed itself to identifying problems and finding solutions to make FISA a more efficient and effective national security tool, while simultaneously protecting American civil rights and civil liberties by preventing future abuses. H.R. 6611 contains 40 targeted reforms that solve the problems we identified with the FBI's querying features, the Title I application process, and the lack of transparency with the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, known as the FISC. With groups like Hamas, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and Hezbollah calling for attacks targeting the homeland and American allies and interests abroad, we are currently at the highest threat to national security to the United States in a decade. FISA is our best weapon to combat the threats we face today and in the future. The American people are looking for us to keep them safe. What we do today to both reform and reauthorize FISA will help ensure that we are doing what we were sent to Washington for. Before I conclude, I want to thank Congressman Darren LaHood and Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick for their efforts in leading our working groups. I also want to thank my ranking member Jim Himes for his bipartisan support throughout this process. Finally, I would like to thank the committee staff for their countless hours they've spent drafting this important legislation. I do want to take a minute and make a few comments about the bill that was passed by Judiciary. Yesterday, the Judiciary Committee passed a bill purporting to be FISA reauthorization and reform. Our bill is targeted to FBI abuses, and I think I would have thought that their bill would have also. However, their bill spends more time expanding the constitutional rights of foreigners who travel in and out of the United States. It creates civil liability for telecommunications companies that work with our intelligence community voluntarily. And curiously, it provides immunity from prosecution for some horrific crimes if they're discovered in 702 foreign intelligence collection. Under their bill, 702 information would not be admissible in criminal prosecutions for horrific crimes such as child pornography, human trafficking, murder, and even money laundering. These are provisions of their bill that they're going to have to explain. Our bill is targeted toward FBI abuses, protecting the American citizens, and ensuring that we can address the national security threats to our nation. With that, I want to recognize my ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm very proud to support the FISA Reform and Reauthorization Act of 2023. For the better part of a year, the House Intelligence Committee has worked diligently and collaboratively on an unprecedented basis on this bill, starting from the premise that it is essential that we reauthorize Section 702 of FISA, but that we cannot and will not do so without significant reforms. I cannot stress enough the background work that went into this product over the last year. Frankly, I've never seen anything quite like it in my 15 years in Congress. Hearing after hearing, hundreds if not thousands of meetings and get-togethers with every element of the government that uses or touches or is interested in 702 authorities, meetings with FISA judges, privacy advocates, and then constant bicameral, bipartisan negotiation. I think I spent more time over the course of the 2 weeks with this chairman and with Chairman Warner over in the Senate than I've spent with family members. So this is really a product of an immense amount of work around a very, very technical subject. The bill is the product of those many efforts, and it includes reforms that are tough as well as targeted, aimed at ensuring that we can continue to use this foreign intelligence tool to keep Americans safe, but that we can also have confidence that it is being used in a way that is consistent with our values. I want to walk through a few specific provisions that are in the bill, but first a word about the process. We have examined the value that the authority provides every day to the intelligence community, a value that is best exemplified by the fact that our most exquisite intelligence product, the President Daily Brief, often contains an average of roughly 60% of items that are derived from FISA 702. We have countless examples, some declassified, but many more still highly classified, that demonstrate why Section 702 is indispensable and how it very literally saves American lives. That's why the President's Intelligence Advisory Board stated in their report on Section 702 earlier this year that the failure to reauthorize Section 702 would be judged as, quote, one of the worst intelligence failures of our time. Our oversight demonstrated the value of Section 702, but it also found that there have been genuine problems in how Section 702 has been used, which the Chairman referred to. There is plenty of room for important reforms. The problems are primarily within the FBI, where the Bureau for many years demonstrated an unacceptable record on compliance with the standards for querying U.S. persons, a record that is well documented in audits performed by the DOJ, as well as declassified opinions from the FISC. The administration has put in place a series of policies that are beginning to drive change at the Bureau and reduces these abuses, and those policies will be codified and built upon in this bill. To highlight a few provisions among the many that are in this bill, we would institute a flat prohibition on queries conducted by the FBI to uncover, quote, evidence of a crime. This is important for two reasons. First, it removes any doubt that Section 702 is a foreign intelligence authority, not a law enforcement tool. That is what Congress intended when it was first enacted, and this makes that distinction crystal clear. Second, it will help remove confusion on the part of FBI agents about what constitutes a permissible query and drive improvements in compliance. This bill would also reduce by 90% the number of individuals at the FBI who can approve a U.S. person query, meaning that only 550 supervisors and attorneys at the agency could approve a query of a U.S. person against the 702 database. As with many other changes, this is intended to reduce compliance failures and to ensure that every time the FBI queries the FISA 702 data, it does so for a permissible and lawful purpose. This bill would, for the first time, put in law a prohibition against queries of Section 702 data whose purpose is either to suppress free expression or to disadvantage a person on the basis of religion, ethnicity, race, gender, or any other arbitrary characteristic. And finally, this bill includes important reforms to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court itself, most notably by requiring that the FISC appoint an amicus each time the government seeks to renew its annual certification under Section 702. This will make sure that the FISC process will be adversarial and the arguments made by the government will receive strictest scrutiny. Finally, as I said before, this bill is the product of extensive bicameral and bipartisan negotiation and compromise. As such, it's not the perfect bill for anybody sitting up here, but this is how one legislates in a wide and diverse body. Each and every one of us would make individual changes, and because we don't purport to have the perfect bill, merely the best bill, this bill, too, like previous FISA authorizations, will sunset, giving a future Congress another opportunity to consider the value of the program and reforms. As this process proceeds, all of us on this committee stand ready to work with our colleagues in the House and Senate to reauthorize Section 702 and to do so with the smart and tough reforms that are so clearly needed. Once again, thank you to the staff who put in hundreds, if not thousands, of hours on this product, and thank you to Chairman Turner and all the members of this committee for their contributions to this effort and our national security. I urge support for the legislation and yield back.
Thank you. We now turn to calling up the bill, and then we'll turn to comments from members. Pursuant to notice, I now call up H.R. 6611, the FISA Reform and Reauthorization Act of 2023. The clerk shall report the title of the bill.
H.R. 6611, the FISA Reform and Reauthorization Act of 2023.
Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with, and the bill is open to amendment at any point. At this time, does any member wish to be recognized? I recognize Representative Castro.
Thank you, Chairman. The reform and reauthorization of FISA 702 is one of the most important tasks that this committee has, and this will be my second authorization process as a member of the Intelligence Committee. I want to first thank Chairman Turner and Ranking Member Himes and my colleagues on the committee, and also all of the staff, both Republican and Democrat, for their efforts over the last year in investigating the uses and abuses of this authority and proposing reforms. The process that Chairman Turner and Ranking Member Himes set up has been a thoughtful and earnest one. Over the last year, we have participated in numerous engagements with the intelligence community, the FBI, and others that have the responsibility to use these important tools authorized by law. Through that process, including as part of the bipartisan working group, I've come to appreciate the immense value of the FISA 702 authority in protecting Americans and countering our adversaries. There's no question that this authority is critical for America's national security. It has saved American lives. It has informed our diplomats as they negotiate with our adversaries. Everything I have seen during my time in this committee has led me to believe that FISA 702 should be reauthorized. But, as they say, the devil is in the details. Just as I've come to appreciate the importance of FISA 702, I've also come to understand the serious risks that the abuse of such an authority can and has led to in our country. Under current practice and law, intelligence agencies and the FBI are able to search the 702 database for communications between foreign nationals and U.S. citizens or residents. This, understandably, raises privacy and civil liberties risks, and while there are many legitimate cases where such searches need to be conducted, it's our responsibility to ensure that this is done in an appropriate manner. This committee's bill implements and codifies a number of important reforms to constrain the privacy and civil liberties risks to American citizens. But I'm open to more restrictions on when the government can conduct such U.S. person queries in FISA 702, including judicial review of U.S. person queries if structured appropriately. In addition to what may not be in the bill, I also have serious concerns with certain provisions in the committee's bill which prevent me from lending my support to it at this time. The most important is the language in Section 505, which codifies a process to, quote, vet non-citizens who attempt to enter the United States or wish to enter the United States for immigration, tourism, business, or personal reasons through the 702 database. I represent San Antonio, Texas, and I have family who live in the border communities along both sides of the Rio Grande. My constituents and those in South Texas have a very different relationship with the border than most Americans. We have deep family ties with communities in Mexico that go back generations. We depend on trade with Mexico to sustain our economies. Thousands of people cross the border every day to visit family, commute to work, or simply shop at the malls. I'm increasingly concerned by the rhetoric from many parts of this Congress and from leading public figures and presidential candidates who want to, quote, shut down the border and to stop those seeking refuge in the United States from attempting to. Between 2017 and 2021, I spent 4 years fighting an ever-increasing barrage of the most ill-conceived and malicious policies to harm migrants and border communities, and I'm increasingly concerned that we will relive those experiences again. I fear that codifying this provision, especially without meaningful safeguards, would give those who capitalize on fear and xenophobia an important tool to pursue their agenda. I do not believe that this is the intention of the authors of the bill, but we cannot trust that those who will wield these powers that we present to them in the future will not abuse those powers. Protecting the civil liberties of Americans against surveillance is a personal issue for me. My mother, a civil rights activist in the 1960s and 70s and even now, was surveilled by the FBI back then, as were many of her colleagues in the Mexican-American civil rights movement and those who were in the African-American civil rights movement and other political movements. So my family knows what it means for the government to turn these powerful tools against it. It's clear that serious reform of the FISA 702 authorities are needed, and there are important proposals on reforming the authority being debated in the Senate and, of course, in other committees in the House of Representatives. Regardless of what happens to this bill in committee today, I will remain engaged with my colleagues in this committee, the Judiciary Committee, and the Senate to come up with a way to reauthorize FISA 702 in a manner that appropriately protects civil liberties and minimizes its potential for abuse, regardless of who sits in the Oval Office. With that, I yield back.
Thank you. I recognize Representative Crenshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this markup. I think it's important to make a statement about FISA reauthorization, what it means, and the current debate that's happening regarding FISA reauthorization. This committee, and I can't take a lot of credit for this, but members of this committee have worked months and months and months to come up with reforms that I think are absolutely needed. And for the public listening, to put it simply, those reforms would have prevented the abuses of Crossfire Hurricane that occurred against President Trump. If this is passed, those abuses could not have happened, and many other abuses as well. A lot of thought has been put into how to reform FISA 702, and I'll tell you what, I don't think the FBI likes a lot of these reforms. And yet, there is disagreement here on whether or not we should pass it. There are members of both parties that want additional reforms. And I can't tell you how concerned I am about those proposals. Usually when we disagree up here, and there's a lot of disagreements, and the outcomes of those disagreements are not always that consequential. The world keeps turning. America is really hard to screw up. That's what I love about America. This one really concerns me. I come from a national security background. I have actively tracked bad guys. I've actively tracked terrorists. I know what it takes to investigate, and all of the different threads that you have to pull to conduct that investigation and eventually find the guy who wants to harm or kill or spy on Americans. It takes a lot of work, and it takes some flexibility. Now, that flexibility can't be endless, which is why we're doing additional reforms to an already very strict process. But the reforms coming out of the Judiciary Committee are downright terrifying. It effectively would dismantle FISA 702 as we know it. They'll market it as simply saying, well, look, we're just protecting people's Fourth Amendment rights. We're just saying that you have to have a warrant before search and seizure. That's how it will be represented to you. That is not true. That is not exactly what their reforms do. What their reforms do, the proper analogy would be saying that you need a warrant every time a cop wants to run a license plate. So every time a police officer sees a car go by that's speeding or driving erratically, and he wants to run that license plate, you would need a warrant. That's, of course, not how we do things. We're able to access databases with information that we already have, lawfully have. I don't know if the people proposing these reforms understand that. I do know that they've never done my job to try and find terrorists and pull on those threads of information in order to find those terrorists. I do know that they've never done that and know how difficult it actually is. I do know that they don't see what we see on the Intelligence Committee of the massive number of threats that our country is facing. They have seen the FBI director recently say that we have never seen more red alarms going off around the world when it comes to threats against the homeland. And I absolutely believe him because, of course, we see it from our own position here, but also it's intuitive. It's obvious. You have an open border where anyone can get in. You have China on the march. You have Venezuela considering an invasion. You have Iran creating chaos in the Middle East. You have Hamas committing atrocities against Israel. You have Russia invading Ukraine. Of course, there are red alarms going off everywhere. And for us to say that we should dismantle one of our primary intelligence collection tools in the midst of all this is so completely insane that I wish it were funnier, but it's not. This is the one thing, this is the one big disagreement in Congress that actually should frighten the hell out of us. And with that, I yield back.
Does any member wish to offer an amendment or have any further discussion? Seeing none. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I want to thank you and the ranking member for all of the work that you've done on addressing the important matter of reauthorizing the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Program. I'm going to support the committee in its approval of this bill, which is a bipartisan effort that represents an unprecedented overhaul of FISA while preserving its vital role in safeguarding our national security. As we continue negotiations in earnest with the Committee on Judiciary, it's imperative that we recognize the need for reforms within the program. The proposed bill reflects this acknowledgement, incorporating measures to strengthen the supervision of queries of U.S. persons by the FBI and eliminating the authority to conduct queries unrelated to national security. It is paramount to understand that the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, particularly Section 702, is a cornerstone in our intelligence collection efforts. The intelligence community and various stakeholders have consistently deemed it essential to preventing transnational terrorist and criminal activities. Its constitutionality has been affirmed repeatedly in federal courts, and its effectiveness in safeguarding our nation is unassailable. In the current threat environment, highlighted by the increased terrorism concerns amid the Israel-Hamas war, FBI Director Christopher Wray has emphasized the urgency of maintaining this vital tool. And I would have this committee know that I have worked personally with Director Wray in the aftermath of 9/11 when we were both political appointees at the Justice Department, and I know his loyalty to this country and the work that he and men and women of the FBI are doing to keep the homeland safe. We cannot afford to let it lapse, especially when our government is tirelessly working to prevent potential attacks. I am pleased to see the bill expand the definition of foreign intelligence to include counter-narcotic efforts. This expansion is particularly relevant to my district, the Virgin Islands of the United States, which is situated in the transit zone. Including counter-narcotics in the scope of foreign intelligence will undoubtedly enhance our ability to combat transnational drug trafficking, which we know is linked to counterterrorism. Moreover, the bill introduces accountability measures for FISA noncompliance, ensuring executive leaders and employees are held responsible. It establishes criminal and administrative penalties for intentional misconduct related to FISA, strengthening the integrity of the entire process. The reforms also extend to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, introducing amicus curiae in the annual reauthorization process and enhancing the adversarial nature of the proceedings. These changes aim to reinforce fairness, independence, and protect the privacy and civil liberties of America. In conclusion, I support the committee in adopting the FISA Reform Reauthorization Act of 2023. This bill strikes a delicate balance between national security imperatives and safeguarding the rights of American citizens. Let's move forward with the understanding that reauthorizing Section 702 is not just a necessity, but a duty to protect our nation from evolving threats. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Plaskett. Are there any other members who wish to either offer an amendment or to speak concerning 6611? Seeing none, I move for the adoption of H.R. 6611, the FISA Reform and Reauthorization Act of 2023. The question is on the adoption of 6611. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the bill is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Himes, for the purpose of a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the committee report favorably to the House the bill H.R. 6611.
The question is on the motion of the gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Himes. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Members may request to file supplemental, minority, additional, or dissenting views as part of the committee report. Mr. Himes, are you or any member planning to file minority views?
Yes, we will.
Consistent with House rules, members are granted 2 additional calendar days to file minority or any other supplemental views to the committee's report to the House on H.R. 6611 pursuant to Clause 2L of House Rule 11. I ask unanimous consent that committee staff be authorized to make necessary conforming technical and clerical changes to the bill adopted by the committee and to remove from the bill provisions that would result in additional direct spending. Without objection, so ordered. I ask unanimous consent that the committee authorize the use of proxy voting in any conference committee with the Senate regarding H.R. 6611 or any similar legislation passed by the Senate. Without objection, so ordered. There being no further legislative business before the committee, this meeting is adjourned.